Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the SAIEE Nuclear Chapter webinar on enhancing nuclear safety and security through technical support organisations. Before we start, a few webinar considerations. Attendees are reminded to ensure the volume is turned up on your device. Ensure you have a stable internet connection. This will ensure the streaming and audio will run smoothly. Attendees can ask questions via the questions panel located within the GoToWebinar control panel. And by default, the control panel is located on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat function is reserved for webinar organisers and panelists to communicate with attendees. Attendees will not be able to chat with each other, however, are encouraged to ask questions. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the SAIEE YouTube channel, SAIEE TV. The registration link to this channel is in the chat box. Please register, it's free. The recording of this webinar will be listed under the Nuclear Chapter playlist. This channel is updated regularly, so register so you can receive updates. A certificate of attendance will be issued a few days after this webinar. I'd like to introduce you now to our host for this morning, David Nichols, who is the chairman of the SAIEE Nuclear Chapter, and the chairperson of the board of the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation, NECSA, in January 2020. Prior to his retirement at the end of December 2018, he was the chief nuclear officer at Eskom. Internationally, Mr. Nichols was the chairman of the IAEA Technical Working Group on Light Water Reactors from 2010 to 2016, and is currently the co-chair of the IAEA Technical Working Group on Nuclear Power Plant Operations. He was a member of WANA's post-Fukushima design review team from 2012 to 2018. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Minx. Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm not doing much this morning except introducing Safiso. But before I go on to that, I would just like to comment that we are doing a series of upcoming webinars. The first one's down for the first one's down for the 20th of March, and then the following ones are going to be in April, May, and June. And these are to discuss the small modular reactor technologies. So what we're hoping to do is to present the current status of water-cooled small modular reactors in the world, the different designs, the technologies, the issues with the technologies, the pluses and the minuses. And so the present plan is 20th of March, we'll be doing water-cooled small modular reactors. 24th of April, we're planning to do gas-cooled reactors, which of course PVMR was a gas-cooled reactor. 22nd of May, we're looking for molten salt fueled or molten salt cooled. These are exciting designs, not that much commercial experience, but they have been built. And then lastly, 26th of June, the fast reactors, lead cooled, sodium cooled, etc. So that's a bit of background going forward. So looking forward to seeing you all on the 20th again. Having said that, I'd like to go on to talk about what we're doing today. And we're doing the presentation, and if we could just bring up his slide, please. Dr. Safiso Ntako is the director of the National Nuclear Regulator Center of Nuclear Safety and Security, and is responsible for regulatory research and development, education, training, and scientific technical services. He's more than 10 years experience working in the nuclear sector in a regulatory capacity across multiple projects with a primary focus on nuclear and civil structural engineering. As I said, you heard earlier in my bio, I was heavily involved in safety. I ran Eskom's initial nuclear safety organization back in the late 80s, early 90s, and have been around that side of things, so very important. And he's going to present to us today enhancing nuclear safety and security through the use of technical support organizations. And I think it's a vital topic because we keep talking about the nuclear technology and the nuclear industry, but we operate under a very close regulation and often the local regulators have a limited resource base. So again, the support organisations are really important. So with that, I will turn my camera off and pass over to Safiso. So Safiso, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dave. Can you hear me and can you see my presentation? If you can just confirm that, then I will start with the presentation.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I will be talking to you about the subject of enhancing nuclear safety and security through what we call technical and scientific support organizations. And I will be defining challenges and opportunities in South Africa. I will talk you through the terms that I've used in the title of my presentation, like enhancing nuclear safety, security, because I understand that these are industry jargon terms and some of the audience here may not be familiar with those terms. So these terms will be defined as part of my presentation. My presentation is divided into two parts. The first part deals with an overview of the nuclear safety law of South Africa. And also I will provide an overview of the regulatory approach that is followed in South Africa. And in the second part, I will title the subject of this seminar. So the primary legislation that governs the nuclear safety law in South Africa is the National Nuclear Regulatory Act, that's Act number 47 of 1999. And you would see that according to this legislation, the NNR exists to regulate the use of nuclear energy and primarily to protect the public, property, and the environment against nuclear damage. There are other tasks that are defined in that primary legislation, but the very first task is the main task. It is important also to recognize that there are other aspects that are not primarily regulated under the NNR Act. And these are aspects such as nuclear security and safeguards aspects, including, for example, exposure to cosmic radiation, group 3 and group 4 hazardous substances, and also exposure to non-ionizing radiation. This slide simply shows you the dose limits that have to be obeyed for by all those that operate nuclear facilities for the protection of the public and also workers. You will see that for workers, we have 20 millisievert per year as a criteria for protecting the workers, a sievert here being the unit of measurement for defining the exposure of humans to the dangers of ionizing radiation. So for members of the public, the dose that we use, the dose criteria that we use as a limit is 1 millisievert per year. On this slide, I've simply portrayed to you the scope of regulation. In other words, at what dose quantities to start regulating. You will see that in the red block, that red block shows those human activities that involves exposure to ionizing radiation that will be regulated. And the green block is activities that do not need to be regulated by virtue of the fact that they fall under or less than the criteria that is used to define the scope or the beginning of the scope of regulation. And there are borderline cases, and for those borderline cases, one would have to apply a protection strategy or exempt activities from regulation. In order for us to monitor, or for the regulatory body to monitor whether the public is being exposed to a dose that is higher than the regulatory criteria or lower than the regulatory criteria, it has to conduct what is called a safety assessment, because it is virtually impossible to measure the dose for public individuals because there are too many of them. For workers, it is straightforward. You can put on them wearable devices, which we call TLDs, and so on and so forth. But for members of the public, what we do, we conduct safety assessments, focusing on these exposure pathways that you see highlighted on this slide: the ingestion pathway, the atmospheric pathway for exposure to radon, for example, which is a gas, a radioactive gas, and also the atmospheric pathway, which has to do with exposure to, for example, radioactive dust, and the direct pathway. So this really is the important work that is done by the experts inside the regulatory body. This slide is meant to show you the history of the NNR. You will see that nuclear development in South Africa dates back to 1948. And it is interesting to note that in this slide, the operations of the NNR actually are more closely associated with the NEXA operations. In other words, the origin of NNR began from NEXA. And this makes sense because NEXA operates the oldest nuclear facility in the country, which is the SAFA research reactor. And therefore, the NNR would have existed or would have come out of, would have been born out of NEXA operations. So I'll now discuss the regulatory approach that is used in South Africa, and the regulatory approach is taken from the IAA. The IAA recognizes three types of regulatory approaches. There is a prescriptive licensing approach, and under the prescriptive licensing approach, what the regulatory body does is to specify safety criteria or safety goals that will need to be met, as well as detailed technical criteria that support those safety goals. So that's one form. Another approach is simply to specify safety goals without necessarily specifying the detailed technical criteria that support those safety goals. In other words, you leave it up to the regulated entity to propose to you how the safety goals will be met. And the IAA, of course, recognizes that there is another intermediate criteria or approach that lies in between these two. In other words, the combination of a prescriptive criteria and performance-based licensing criteria. So South Africa's approach falls under option 3. In other words, it's based on the combination of prescriptive criteria and performance-based licensing approach. We call it process-based licensing approach, for lack of a better word. What is important about the South African approach is that it primarily requires an implementation of an integrated management system for it to be successful. So all our regulated entities at least have to show evidence that they comply with the principles of integrated management system. But why is a regulatory approach important? The answer is shown on this slide. So you'll see that the regulatory approach is important for controlling the size and the operations of a regulatory body. And this slide shows the structure of the NNR as it currently exists based on the licensing approach that I've discussed in the previous slide. There are 2 units that discharges the primary mandate of the NNR on behalf of the NNR, and I will discuss those units. We have the NPP division and also the division called NTN. NTN stands for Nuclear Technology and Norm. So I will now discuss these divisions in turn, but before I do that, I would also like just to highlight the primary functions of the regulatory body. There are 4 main functions of a regulatory body, and that's basically to process new applications, to conduct safety assessments, and to develop nuclear safety regulations and regulatory guidance documents. And lastly, to perform inspections at regulated facilities. This slide shows the geographic distribution of facilities that we currently regulate. You will know that in terms of what we call nuclear installations, there are 3 types of them. It's the research reactor at the NEXA site near Pelindaba, Pretoria. And then there is a Valpoort radioactive waste disposal facility in the Northern Cape, and also the Quebec NPP, which you are already familiar with, and quite a number of mining facilities and mineral processing facilities. So as I said, I was going to discuss to you or present to you what the NPP NNR division does. So this is a division that is mandated with a mission to provide regulatory oversight over Quebec nuclear operations. So in essence, this division provides regulatory control over siting, design, commissioning, and decommissioning of facilities that supports the Quebec nuclear power plant. And of course, any new nuclear power plant that is likely to be built in South Africa will be regulated under this division. Simply a picture of the Quebec NPP that is regulated by that division on behalf of the NNR. And you will see that this facility is about 40 years old now, which is why we are currently licensing the long-term operation project for Quebec Nuclear Power Plant. And what this project does, it simply consists of identifying life-limiting components, such as steam generators, and then replacing those components to demonstrate that the facility can be operated for a longer period of time. And of course, not all components are replaceable. You can think of, for example, the containment building. The containment building, which is made predominantly out of concrete, reinforced concrete to be specific, cannot be replaced. But fortunately, there is an assessment methodology that would need to be followed to demonstrate that these components, even if they are not replaceable, they can still, of course, be operated to support long-term operation of the facility. So in that methodology consists of simply classifying these components into mechanical components, civil components, and electrical components, and then conducting safety assessments, basically exploiting the design margins of those components to show that they can still last for the intended period of long-term operation. That's basically what a safety assessment is for long-term operation. What you see on this slide is other projects that are currently regulated by the NNR NPP division. For example, on the right is a project that deals with the expansion of the spent fuel facility. The spent fuel facility is used to store spent fuel within Quebec, because when Quebec was licensed, of course, it had a limited or a defined capability to store spent fuel, the spent fuel that comes from the reactor. So it is important then to extend or to expand the capability of the storage facility to take into account the extended period of operation. What you see on the right is a site that we're also currently licensing under the NPP division, and it's a potential site for any new build that could be commenced in South Africa. And this is a site currently that is located near Gqeberha, Port Elizabeth. It's called the Tailspin site. I will briefly now shift focus to the NTN program. The NTN program is divided into two sub-programs. One deals with what we call natural occurring radioactive material norm, and it's predominantly the regulation of mines and mineral processing facilities, and also historically contaminated sites that come from legacy mines that were commissioned quite some time back in South Africa and perhaps left without appropriate rehabilitation measures. And then on the right, what you see is a sub-program that deals with the regulation of the Safari Research Reactor, the radioactive waste disposal facility at Valports, and also the regulation of nuclear vessels that will dock on the shores of South Africa from time to time. These pictures simply shows the scope of operations associated with these programs that I've mentioned. The slide 21, for example, shows the operations supporting the Safari Research Reactor. Slide 22 shows the operations supporting or associated with the Valports waste disposal site. And the last illustration shows the operations associated, for example, with mining tailings. Because of the diversity of the facilities that are under the NOM program, you will see that there is no one size fits all for the types of assessments that needs to be conducted there. And our highly experienced specialists will have to conduct each safety assessment on a case-by-case basis, take into account the unique design arrangement for each facility. And currently we're running a project funded with a technical cooperation project funded with the help of the European Commission that is assisting us to design some generic scenarios that can be modified on a case-by-case basis to look at these types of facilities because of their diversity. So specialists would have to ask themselves fundamental questions as to what is the purpose of this facility? What operations would be associated with this facility, and what are the regulatory requirements on a case-by-case basis for such facility? And this is just this slide illustrates an example, for example, of one of the safety assessment scenario portraying a typical emission from a processing plant. So this would be one scenario that will fall under the scope of the activities that we regulate. This specific one is more relevant for mining operations, for example, where from time to time we find that to facilitate the mining operation, underground water will need to be pumped up to dewater the mine, and such underground water would eventually potentially pollute or contaminate surface soils. So this will be a scenario, assessment scenario that will also encounter as part of our operations. This one deals with exposure to radon associated with uranium tailings facility. This is another assessment scenario that will encounter as part of our activities. This slide I've simply included it for the interested reader, those that may be curious as to where radon, which is a radioactive gas, will come from in the uranium decay chain series. So I think we have now built sufficient vocabulary, and we are now ready to discuss the second part of our presentation, which deals with opportunities for enhancing nuclear safety and security through what we call technical support organizations. But I'm also mindful of the fact that we need to define these terms. What do we mean, for example, by enhancing? So enhancing refers to that which either increases the effectiveness or the efficiency of a regulatory body, or reduces the risk of the regulatory body, and the risk can be classified into different components. You can think of the regulatory safety risk, the legal risk, the financial risk, and also the professional technical risk. It could also refer to, enhancing could also refer to increasing the regulatory body's independence of judgment, or increasing its capability to maintain strategic skills, or increasing its potential for generating collaborative partnerships, which of course support the mandate of the regulatory body. So in essence, that's what we mean by enhancing in the context of this presentation. For the meaning of nuclear safety, I've resorted to the nuclear law definition that is found in the IAEA safety glossary, specifically the 2018 edition. So where we have the SSS framework for defining nuclear safety. Basically, nuclear safety can be divided into three components: safety, security, and safeguards. And I've provided primary references for your perusal as to what those components are. And I'm now going to switch focus and discuss or define the term technical support organization. And again, I've used the IAEA framework. The IAEA framework simply defines this TECDOC 1835, defines the TSO organization as that organization which can either be inside the regulatory body or outside the regulatory body, that has been either legislated or contracted by the regulatory body to support the mandate of the regulatory body. It is interesting to note that according to this definition, the TSO can also support sensitive functions within a regulatory body, such as nuclear security and safeguards. In other words, the definition of a TSO is not limited to only non-state owned, it's not limited to state-owned entities. It is also extended to private actors. So that, I think, is very important to recognize. So slide 33 shows you the illustration of the definition of a technical support organization according to the framework of TECDOC 1835, which I've just discussed right now. And you can see from this slide that a TSO can either be inside the regulatory body or outside the regulatory body. If the TSO is outside the regulatory body, obviously it needs to be larger. In other words, apply a larger chunk of service to the regulatory body. But if the regulatory body already has what we call an internal TSO, you'll see that the size of the external TSO will be reduced logically. This slide shows the TSO structure in South Africa according to the current arrangement of the National Nuclear Regulatory Body. From this slide, you can see that there are two internal TSOs. One is called the RITS. RITS stands for Regulatory Improvement and Technical Services. Another one is CNSS. CNSS simply stands for Center for Nuclear Safety and Security. So these TSOs specialize in different functions. You'll see that RITS is primarily responsible for conducting safety assessment. So it provides these services to the regulatory body through one local supplier that also have safety assessment expertise, whereas CNSS provides services primarily along the lines of regulatory research and development and also education and training. And CNSS does this through local universities. And I will just define what the RISC program looks like. The RISC program, as I said, is primarily responsible for conducting safety assessments on behalf of the NNR, and of course a whole host of other activities, such as the development of regulatory standards, but the primary function is conducting safety assessments. CNSS, I've already mentioned that it provides services that are along the lines of education and training, and also research, regulatory research and development. It is important also to note that the CNSS has an advisory structure that advises the NNR on the technical sustainability of CNSS programs in these areas, education and training and regulatory research. This structure has two international experts from France and Switzerland at the moment, and two local experts from the local industry, and also local experts from academic institutions that basically make partner institutions to CNSS. And I've illustrated the framework for CNSS operations on this slide. CNSS operates what we call a partnership model or a hub and spokes model. Historically, the partners of CNSS have been local universities, academic institutions, but in the recent and ongoing technical cooperation project that we're currently implementing, and this project is funded currently by the European Commission, we have partnered with industry players. And under this contractual arrangement, you can see, for example, that the industry partners, their logo are shown on the right-hand side of this slide. So for the very first time, our partnership does not only consist of academic institutions, but it also includes industry players, which I think is very important for us. So coming to towards the end of my presentation, I will discuss the challenges and opportunities presented by the TSO structure for R&D. So let's tackle R&D first. So if we look at the landscape currently in South Africa, you'll see that the R&D TSO structure looks like this. So we have NNR, which is the primary organization, and then two internal TSOs. RITS provide the safety assessment expertise through one local supplier, whereas CNSS provides research and development expertise through universities, predominantly local universities. So we will see that this structure presents challenges in that there is lack of synergy between researchers and safety assessment experts. And you will expect this logically because we have a situation where the expertise for safety assessment lies with industry, whereas the expertise for research and development lies with academic institutions. And therefore there is no synergy, there is no cross-pollination between the suppliers and universities. And this is important because research and development is supposed to be serving the issues encountered during safety assessment. So this lack of synergy then is a challenge. Therefore, for industry out there, there is an opportunity to foster synergy between researchers and safety assessment experts. So this is an opportunity. And on this next slide, I simply highlight the benefits that can accrue from resolving this challenge. One such benefit is that if this synergy is put into place, research outcomes will directly answer safety assessment issues in a practical way for obvious reasons, because research formulation will be done directly and in collaboration with safety assessment experts. The second benefit is that research programs will breed skills for safety assessment programs and vice versa. So there will be cross-specialization of skills. Ultimately, this will lead to the enhancement of nuclear safety and security according to the criteria that I've defined earlier. So if you repeat this analysis, you will see that you can also identify some opportunities in the R&D sector that can be addressed. For example, starting with bullet number 2, there is a need to restructure our nuclear research programs to achieve synergy between the use of experimental facility and simulation tools. And the world now is moving towards the use of simulation tools, but this still needs to be validated by experimental facilities, including observations. There is a need, especially in this country, for us to continue to develop and maintain tools for safety assessment. And these are tools of strategic importance. And we think, for example, of the tools that were developed during the PBMR time. There were quite a number of safety tools that were developed under that project, and these will need to be maintained going forward, including the preservation of experimental facilities that also supported the PBMR project, and also that continue to support the nuclear industry in general. You think of, for example, facilities for timber labs and facilities associated with the NEXA operations. The fifth opportunity that can be exploited is developing interactions and connections with the international stakeholders, such as the International Nuclear Energy Agency under the OECD forum. We currently have no participation in that forum, and we definitely need to look into opportunities for participating in that forum. The last two opportunities are the history of our country. So there's an opportunity to address issues related to historical imbalances, diversity, and also inclusion. So I will now perform the same analysis, but looking at the TSO structure for education and training. As I said, that we have RITS that is also provides safety assessment expertise, whereas we have CNSS that provide education and training through local universities. And if you perform the same analysis that we did in the previous slides, you will see that also there is currently a lack of synergy between education and training providers and safety assessment experts, because you will expect again this, you'll expect this. It simply flows from the fact that education and training expertise lies with academic institutions, whereas safety assessment expertise lies with industry. So there's definitely lack of synergy, and there are opportunities then to achieve synergy between these, so that safety assessment expertise can be used to breed skills for education and training expertise. And if these opportunities are addressed, there will be an improvement of undergraduate training curricula, as well as postgraduate training curricula, and the curricula for the development of what we call accredited short learning courses. And these courses will be, and different curricula will be industry relevant in that they've been developed based on the knowledge and issues that are developed or encountered through the safety assessment programs. So another area to improve on is fellowship programs for nuclear skills in particular. The development and validation of codes is a key area, and I will come back to this key area towards the concluding part of my presentation. And I've already discuss number 6, number 7, and number 8. So these are common opportunities that also comes from the TSOs R&D space. So if these challenges then are addressed, what will be the outcome for nuclear safety assessment? Well, addressing these challenges will directly lead to the localization of specialized skills for one, aging management of components important for safety. We know that our facilities are old, so they need specialized skills for aging management of components that are important for safety. From time to time, these facilities will have to be retrofitted with new equipment to support long-term operation, such as has happened with the Kuwait nuclear power plant, where we had to retrofit the plant with steam generators. So we need specialized skills for the analysis of those new retrofitting equipment. The rest of the skills from 3 to 9, these are skills that are generic in the nuclear industry, and they are very specialized skills that are always needed. For example, the skill for analyzing the accident of criticality is a highly specialized skills. We currently need skills in that area. The studies for human reliability factors that support our facilities. We currently use generic data borrowed from international sources, and we need to generate our own data. So we need specialized skills in that area. Protection against natural hazards such as earthquakes, we need skills in that area. Skills for studying various, accidental situations such as the behavior of nuclear fuel during meltdown conditions, the confinement of radioactivity, and so on and so forth. So these are specialized skills that we currently need. And here I've just highlighted some codes and methodologies that will need to support nuclear safety, and we'll be very happy to collaborate with industry partners to cultivate skills in this area. These are codes that are used in the area of thermal hydraulics, containment thermal hydraulics, fuel performance, reactor physics, structural mechanics, radiation protection, and also probabilistic safety analysis. So then, in the concluding part of this presentation, I've listed a number of points, which of course I've already presented, that just crystallizes the findings from this presentation. And I'm not going to repeat these points. I've listed them in bullet form here for your own perusal. But what I think will be important to discuss is the way forward. You will see that following on the analysis that I've presented as part of this presentation, there is a consistent theme that is emerging, and that's the lack of synergy between the safety assessment programs as well as research and development programs and education and training programs that are supposed to service the safety assessment programs or the safety assessment expertise. So what this points to as a way forward, and I'll be very happy to take also your opinion on this, is that there is currently a very big need for the country to develop and implement a TSO plan, a Technical Support Organization plan at the national level, with the consultation of all relevant stakeholders, so that there is synergy between safety assessment expertise, which preside in industry, and education and training expertise, and also research and development expertise, which lies in academia. And this is very, very important because, especially in industry, we are beginning to see a dwindling of skills, either through retirement or professionals leaving to other countries. So this is really an urgent matter to address, because safety is supported by a safety assessment expertise, and we cannot afford to have a situation where we have these loss of skills without programs to replenish the skills. If this plan is developed, it should begin with an assessment of existing capabilities. South Africa has quite extensive capabilities in the nuclear sector, in the nuclear safety sector. South Africa has developed tools for conducting safety assessments, and we need to assess the existing capabilities so that we will see what are the gaps to be able to come up with action plans and mechanisms for replenishing these skills. So such a plan should consider also strategic priorities at the national level for the country. And most importantly, it should be led by industry, of course, with participation from academia. So I've come to the end of this presentation, which I think was really, really long, but it was very necessary for me to introduce some introductory background material so that we build a common vocabulary to be able to engage in the last 10 minutes of this presentation. Thank you very much. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nhleko. Ladies and gentlemen, just apologies that David had to run off to his next meeting. So I'll be continuing with the Q&A session. I encourage you to please post your questions. At the moment, we have no questions for our presenter. Please feel free to ask your questions. I'll give it a minute for you to post your questions. I just want to make you aware of the handouts in the handout section. It's the SAIEE Training Academy brochure and the February issue of the What Now magazine. Please download the PDFs there. They are interactive as well. Dr. Nhleko, thank you very much for your presentation. As I said, we have no questions to you at the moment. I just want to give it a few moments to see if anybody has questions. To get involved in the okay, great. To get involved in the SAIEE Nuclear chapter, you will find an email link in the What Now magazine in the back of the publication, second last page, where you can click on there and just send a copy of your CV to the nuclear chapter email address, nuclearchapter@saiee.org.za, and get involved to have weekly meetings discussing any possibilities or whatever problems we have faced in the industry, and they normally sit and brainstorm us on a weekly basis, Thursday mornings. Dr. Nhleko, I don't see any questions. Oh, we have a question here. Thank you very much, Letlonolo Joseph. She's asking, do you have any bursaries for PGD and nuclear engineering available at your company?
Yes, we normally from time to time would issue call for proposals in collaboration with universities, where we actually interview suitable students and we put them under our bursary program, and they will pursue. The requirement is that they pursue studies related to the subject of nuclear safety, so that they become useful to the regulatory body. In other words, they will not pursue any other topic other than the topics that would have provided to them, of course, in collaboration with universities. Just speaking about that, I'm also a product of such a bursary program myself. So we definitely welcome participation from students with the correct attitude. And we do run interview sessions to be able to identify those students with the correct attitude that will be able to fully devote themselves to this area of safety analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nhleko. Yes, bursary programs. SAIEE also offers bursary programs for electrical engineering, but yours is a specialized field. And I think we should collaborate in future to source you also the right candidates for your program. Any other questions to the audience? Please feel free to post them now. Okay, it seems we have no questions for you, Dr. Nhleko. I want to thank you from the SAIEE Nuclear chapter. Thank you so much for you and your team for your presentation and their technical support to you. I really appreciate this, and I hope that we're going to see a presentation from you soon, well, in the near future. I would like to end this webinar now, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning, and have a good day further. Goodbye.